And now is the time in our service where we begin to enter into our time of meditation. So I invite you now to just gently close your eyes. Allow your feet to root to the earth. And just allow the breath to gently flow. And I invite you now to think about the words, "Be free." To think about freedom. To think about what it is that God has called you to do within your freedom of choice. What is God calling you to be? And I invite you to journey within. To that place in which the God consciousness resides within. That place where your imagination resides. That place where those endless possibilities become manifest. What would it look like to just be free in the way God is leading you to be free? What does it feel like? What would it feel like to have everything you've ever dreamed or desired in your life to become manifest? Perhaps you feel undescribable joy. Happiness. Love or peace. And as we prepare to enter into our moment of silence, I invite you to just allow yourself to feel exactly as Spirit is calling you to feel the sheer joy of having all of your dreams and desires become manifest. Just allowing yourself to feel as we enter into our moment of silence. And as you begin to bring your awareness back to this time and this place, you also bring with you an awareness that this feeling doesn't have to stop here. That Christ consciousness, that God consciousness is always forever within. That place where imagination resides, where the possibilities are truly unlimited. Nothing is too great. Nothing is too small. Today we acknowledge that. And we know. And we affirm, I am grateful. And so it is. Namaste. We continue to affirm this God consciousness and this Christ presence within as we move into our time of our new Lord's Prayer. And to Pete for that wonderful music. That's very beautiful, and we're grateful that you two decided to share that with us today. So thanks, Pete. And thanks, Anya, if you are tuning in. And if not, tell her thank you, Pete. So good morning, everybody. It's, I tell everybody when I see you for the first time back, it's almost like a family reunion. Getting to see faces that either I've only seen via Zoom for the past few months or, have only heard voices. So it's good to finally see all of you back. And each Sunday we're getting a few more people back, so it's good to see your faces. And those of you who are still tuning in online, it is wonderful to feel your presence. And thank you so much for spending your Sunday morning with us. So today I want to talk a little bit about stories. Is there anybody out there today that does not like a good story from time to time? Yeah, I figured everybody likes a good story from time to time. But in our 9:15 service, we've been singing some music that's perceived as a little more traditional. It's not quite, some of it's been very similar to what we sing in the Baptist church, but I think we've kind of unitized it a little bit, which makes me a little happy. It's kind of a combination of some of those songs I grew up with a little bit of unity thrown in. Wouldn't you say, Ann? Yeah, that's the way I think. But there's one song that was coming to me the other day. We haven't sung it here yet, but maybe some of you are kind of familiar with it. And it's called Blessed Assurance. And we sang that a lot in the Baptist church I grew up in. But in that song it says, "This is my story, this is my song." Ann knows it. But the rest of the song is a little bit traditional, but I won't really go into that here today, but this is my story. That's what really sticks out to me when I was thinking about that song lately, the words, "This is my story." Because hearing those words again started to make me think that I could use that piece today to kind of craft a talk together. And I also got to thinking, the words, "This is my story," that doesn't have to just be something traditional. It's something we can use here at Unity or anything else under the sun. We can craft our story, and I'll explain what I'm talking about. We often hear this talk about legacies, right? You'll hear people talk about legacies, and you'll hear people ask others, well, what legacy do you want to leave behind? When they're talking about leaving behind, they're talking about after they make their transition from this life onto the next, right? And of course, whatever legacy that we leave behind, it starts with what we start to create right here and right now. Because we've got to have something created in order to leave it behind, right? So I began to ask myself, what is my story? What is it that I want it to say now as I live my life? And what is it I want it to say once I do make my transition onto new adventures and leave this life? But stories can take a little bit of time to craft though, right? Whether you're writing your story or you're telling your story, they take a little bit of time to craft. Because we tend to build our stories word by word, one word at a time, whether we write them or we tell them. And to start, it usually starts with us picking up pen and paper, right? That's where we start. So this is how I started writing mine. Now I knew I I knew that to write my story and to write it in a way that best suited my authenticity, I knew in order to do that I would need to take a deep look at the things that didn't fit my authenticity, right? Sometimes we have to think about what doesn't fit in order to start thinking about and making room to what it is that does fit. So one of the first things I knew I would need to write would be about how I left guilt and shame in my life behind. How I chose instead to embrace myself. Not just part of myself, but all of myself. And how by doing that, I hope that I would be able to inspire others to do the same. But first, let's talk a little bit about what exactly is shame, what shame exactly is. Now, according to her book, Shame and Guilt, author Jane Middleton Moss describes it as a feeling deep within our being that makes us want to hide. We feel suddenly overwhelmed and self-conscious. The feeling of shame is being exposed, visible, and examined by a critical other. So for me, I didn't know that I felt guilt and shame for the longest time. I probably began to feel it around my early teen years when I look back, and this started to happen about the time I began to wonder if God really existed the way that I was being taught in church that it did. Everybody around me seemed to think that it was true. My family, my circles of friends at church, they would talk to me about this outer deity that I've mentioned before. It seemed angry. Somebody that it seemed I was always trying to please, that I was probably never really going to be able to please in the first place. But everybody around me seemed to think that this is true, so why didn't I? Why couldn't I just believe it and live in this, this place of just, okay, that's just the way it is, and go on with my life? I'd started to secretly have a very difficult time with some of the things I was learning at church. And I couldn't quite reconcile what I was hearing versus what I was feeling. And there were some very conflicting emotions, leaving some, it was just very conflicting for me. I was hearing that the Jews, I was hearing that they were God's chosen people, but they were going to be sent to hell because they didn't believe in Jesus the way that we did. I was hearing that gay people were also doomed to these fires of hell because of who it was that they loved. Yet, I knew some gay people out there that were a lot more spiritual and religious than a lot of the people I was hearing these words from. But the list is longer than just that. But I remember starting to take notice and starting to feel that maybe what I was learning wasn't what I truly believed or even felt inside. And while there was a little bit of release in that, because I'm like, whew, God isn't, well, the way the Bible's describing it, there was a little bit of release in that for me. There was also a lot of guilt and shame involved in that. Guilt in thinking at the time that maybe I was doing something wrong, or that maybe I was somehow this black sheep kind of off to the side that didn't quite measure up to the rest of my family and friends. Shame in that I didn't seem to think or believe in the way that those around me were thinking and believing. Maybe something was wrong with me. Maybe I was somehow broken. Those were some of the thoughts that went through my mind. And I got to thinking, I was like, well, it's written right there in the Bible, right? I mean, they're saying we need to take this in a literal sense. Well, it's written in the Bible. So as a result, was there something really wrong with my thinking or not? So these were just some of the thoughts that were going through my mind. But I fully believe that our Unity co-founder, Charles Fillmore, would be very proud of me. I'm just going to give myself a little plug here. Because the first thing I turned to was prayer. And if there was one thing I still believe from my traditional teachings, that was the power of prayer. And I knew that prayer worked. So I decided, I'm going to give it a go. Now, Charles Fillmore, he talked about prayer, and he mentioned that prayer is the most highly accelerated mind action known. He also said it steps up mental action until man's, and remember when this was written, so we're going to say and woman's, until man's and woman's consciousness synchronizes with the Christ mind. And it began to work. Now, during that time frame, I was still doing a little bit of those beseeching prayers where I asked God, because that was just the way I was taught, so I was asking God, but it started to work. And I begin to ask God. I begin to ask God, please show me that I'm on the right path. Maybe it's not in alignment with my traditional teachings, but please show me that I'm on the right path. But then I could begin to believe and know that the right path for me wasn't necessarily the same right path for perhaps my family who still believed a certain way. Or for those at my traditional church that believed a certain way. Maybe my right path was different, and that was okay. And the answers to those prayers, though, didn't seem evident overnight. I didn't pray for this to happen one day, and then the next day, boom, it wakes up, and I've got this great epiphany. The thing is that I stuck with these prayers, and then I ultimately just released them. I prayed in faith and just released them. And then some of you may know this, but in reality, we are also stating an affirmation every time we end our prayers with the word amen. Does anybody know that the word amen is actually a Hebrew word? All right. It's a Hebrew word that means, so it is, so shall it be, so be it. It also means certainly, truly, and this is true. So every time we are ending our prayers, whether traditional or unity or anything else with the word amen, we are saying basically, so it is. We are saying it is true and affirming it as true. But for me, this journey of telling my story and starting to move into my authenticity, it led me away from the church for many years. But I was living my life, and I was doing it still in a very spiritual way. And I also began to live my life in the most authentic way possible, therefore writing my story. I kept my curious nature. I kept that about me. I kept that first and foremost. And I remained open and I remained willing. And I've never been one to shun an opportunity. I'm going to tell y'all, anytime an opportunity comes my way, I at least feel like I'm just going to look at it, even for just a few minutes. Because those opportunities are coming our way for a reason, right? But I began to notice in these opportunities, I began to witness things unfolding in my life. These synchronicities. Things that I might not have even thought twice about if I hadn't been open and willing. I also began to use I am statements. And does anybody in here remember the story, or anybody online remember the story in the Bible of the burning bush? It was in the biblical book of Exodus. It's the only place in the Bible where God actually provides us with its name. The parable talks about how God spoke to Moses from a burning bush, and God was directing Moses to bring the Israelites out of Egypt. Moses is like, I know people are going to ask me, who has told you to come and give us this news? He's like, so he asked God, he's like, who should I say told me to do this? And God tells him in Exodus 3:14, I am who I am. That is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. So you see, when we use I am statements, we're calling forth that essence of God, that we are. I began using these statements for myself because I wanted my story to portray who it is that I really am. In his book, Talks on Truth, Charles Fillmore tells us to meditate upon the I am. And why does he say this? He goes on to explain it. He says, your I am is the son of the God idea and all the possibilities of the principle. Through that idea are open to you. To know thyself is to know that you are I am and not flesh and blood. He goes on to say, your real self is that which says I am. It cannot be described because description is limitation, and your real self is unlimited in its capacity to be. That sounds really powerful, doesn't it? We are using power when we say these I am statements, when we affirm these I am statements. Every time we say I am in describing ourselves, we are also describing God. That's a pretty lofty thing to be doing, isn't it? We are describing ourselves and God because we are a part of that. We can then also ask ourselves before we say an I am statement, is God limited? So am I going to limit myself with my I am statements? We can also ask ourselves before we use an I am statement to describe ourselves, am I also describing God with the words I am using to describe myself when I speak about myself? So I began to ask myself these questions whenever I would state the words I am, and I still do. I will sometimes, if you've ever said I am sorry in front of me, I will often ask you to think about that, because are you really sorry, or are you just apologizing? See the difference? Remember that however you describe yourself in I am statements is also how you are describing the God within. The very essence of God that you are. Again, thinking about writing your story. I also begin to realize my power and how truly powerful of a being that I am. There we go, I am powerful. The thing I had to realize that I wasn't just this formless lump of clay just sitting on a desk somewhere, waiting for somebody else to come and pick me up and to shape me in whatever they wanted to shape me into. I had the power to do that myself. I had the power to choose what it is that I want to be and who it is that I want to be. And power is one of our Unity 12 powers, and it's not one to be taken lightly. There's a lot of power in power, isn't there? I remember when Mindy and I made the decision to move from Texas to Oregon. I knew Reverend Lisa Davis from the Unity of Portland from when we had lived there before, and I knew I wanted to intern with her as a ministerial student. She'd been raised in Unity. She has this wonderful, conscious church, and I was like, I know she's the one I want to intern with. But I also needed to find a full-time job because it's good to have food on the table, isn't it? I get what people call hangry. Yeah, when I'm hungry, I get that whole little bit angry thing and hunger thing going on, so I get hangry. So I knew we needed to eat. But I began to look for jobs in the area, and it wasn't looking overly promising. And I began to start to feel a little defeated with that, with my job search. And some friends of mine there were telling me, they're like, the technical world, because I was working tech back then, they're like, the technical world, it's looking a little bleak right now. There aren't a lot of tech jobs. But then I remembered my power. I started to feel a little down, but then I remembered my power. And it didn't matter what the outside world was telling me. It didn't matter whether those job board listings had 1 million jobs or just one job or no jobs of what it was I was looking for. Because I knew that all it was going to take was one. And that I was powerful enough to manifest the one that I was looking for. So I began to sit in meditation and I began to listen. I started to go within and to connect to my intuition and my guidance, affirming that it was showing me exactly where I needed to go, the opportunities I needed to be open to. And I knew that in that intuition and the within and that guidance was where my power was to be found. It was where I could connect to that. And sure enough, I happened to receive an email. And when we had been in Oregon before, I had consulted with this company for a couple of months, and I received an email, and she asked me, she's like, hey, are you looking for some freelance work? I'm like, yeah, I'm looking for some freelance work. It wasn't enough to get us there, but I'm thinking, hey, some extra cash would be good. So I have a conversation with this. It was a woman, human resources. I had a conversation with her on the phone, and she's like, during our conversation, she's like, you know what? This is starting to sound like a whole lot more work than just a little freelance gig. How would you feel about moving back out here? What can we do to get you here? So we go into negotiation and some talk, and then the full-time job I had there was with Daimler Trucks. A friend of mine that worked there calls and says, hey, your old position is open. Why don't you apply for it and come back? So I did. I interviewed. They offered for me to come back. But the story does not end there. I had also applied for another job a few months prior to that time. Sure enough, they called. I had an interview. They flew me out there, and they were like, this one gets even better, because they were like, we will pay for your relocation. Ask me which one I took. Yeah. But that's what happens when we step into that power and we realize how powerful we are and how we can manifest and add whatever we want, whatever we choose to add to our stories. 3 sudden job offers with one offer to take the financial burden off of moving. That is powerful. And we can do so much more than that. I stepped into it and I claimed my power as this powerful spiritual being that I am. This powerful essence of God that I am. And I mentioned last week about how important our words are. And this just isn't applicable to when we use words with other people. It's also applicable when we use words to describe or to talk with ourselves. Our words matter. What words do you often use when you follow the words I am? What is your story? Now, I also decided to start to let go of some of that guilt and shame to just live my life. I knew that God or Spirit, I knew it was calling me to live my life in a different direction than what I had been taught to live. It didn't matter what anybody else thought. That ultimately didn't matter. What mattered was that I understood this and I was open and I was willing to listen to the direction I was supposed to go. So in his book, Life is for Living, the late, great Reverend Eric Butterworth said, life can be happy and effective. You can make every day that you live a dance, a dirge, or a life march, as you will. Here is a lesson you will enjoy and use, for it will point to a new way of life. Life is for living. And part of that, too, was found in forgiveness of myself. I began to realize that I held this grudge of sorts against myself for not choosing to hold on to those beliefs that, had been in generations of my family, or those beliefs that my traditional church had taught me, or even that my parents were teaching me. I felt a little bit of guilt and shame about that. I felt like I was, in a way, betraying my family or generations, or even, sometimes I would even still go back to this God outside of myself, and I felt like I was possibly betraying this God. But I realized that I had to let go. I had to learn to forgive myself and to live my life as I knew I was being called to live it. We each walk this journey of life in our very own way. Nobody else knows what your path is. Nobody else knows what it is that the God within is, the direction that God within is leading you or calling you to walk. No one knows but you. I had to learn that my life here is my own. And I had to step into it with this great power and with my own wisdom and intuition. And I had to learn to do that without guilt. To live my life in the direction I felt led to do it, and to do it shamelessly. I also had to learn to respectfully release and to let go. So I want to go back to Reverend Eric Butterworth for a minute. He said, again in his book, Life is for Living, every day of our life we have to decide whether we are going to curse the darkness or bring a light, whether we are going to be mourners or masters, whether we are going to engage in fretting or letting. I don't know about y'all, but I think letting sounds a lot better than fretting. Sometimes, I don't even know if people even still use the word fretting, do they? Anyway, yeah. But he also says, don't think about the problem. Think about God. And I know that language can sound a bit like God is this separate thing that's outside of us, but I don't think that's what he meant. To me, this aligns with what I was mentioning earlier, and that is that only I know what the God within me is saying. I alone know my journey. So I want to ask a question, and I don't expect to see a show of hands, but how many of us, deep inside, are quite aware of what Spirit is calling us to do, yet we instead choose to ignore it because it's not what everybody else is doing, or it's not what everybody else thinks we should be doing, or it's not what we were taught we should be doing? How many of us are doing that? I decided once upon a time that I couldn't do that anymore. I had to be authentic to myself. I had no choice. I had to live in my most authentic way because I decided I could not settle for anything less. And it's normal. We may feel a bit of guilt when we choose to do that, when we choose to live for ourselves. There may be a little bit of guilt. But perhaps we are being called to be the pioneers in our families, in our circle of friends, to do something that maybe no one in our family has done before. To step into our power. Maybe that is what Spirit is calling you to do. And it takes courage to be your authentic self, doesn't it? It takes courage to put yourself out there. But you wouldn't have been called to do it if you didn't have the courage already to do that and to do what it takes. We all read stories from time to time, right? Stories that sound very familiar and stories that we've probably all likely heard some derivative thereof. The prince saves the princess from a fire-breathing dragon. We've all heard that one before. the normal kind of nerdy guy ends up marrying the prom queen. We've all heard that one before. That's been in different stories. But these stories are predictable, right? They get kind of boring after a while. They all have these very similar endings. I, however, want my story to be my own. I want my story to be one about authenticity and about the courage it took to live from that place of authenticity. So this is my story. What is yours? Namaste. All right. So I just want to remind everybody that we are offering prayer still in our service. It's a little bit different. Josie is our prayer chaplain today, and if anyone would like a personal prayer with her, a one-on-one prayer, where do you want them to meet you, Josie? You just want them to come up here? Just come up and see Josie, and she can take you somewhere a little more private if you prefer that. Also, if you would like a prayer but don't want one-on-one here today, Diane Gould is another one of our prayer chaplains. She is standing by at home and will be happy to give you a call. All you need to do, there's some prayer requests on the table. Leave your name and your phone number and drop it in the prayer box, and we'll see to it that Diane gets that and gives you a call for prayer today. We also have Silent Unity that's standing by 24/7. I highly encourage you to give them a call or send them an email. It's a wonderful way to both, to just bask in that prayer, and they give wonderful prayer. So I highly encourage you to use that. And I would like for us to remember our children and our youth ed as they are meeting right now. So I'd like to invite you to, together with me, let's give them our unity blessing. Children and Youth Ed Department, we love you, we bless you, we appreciate you, and we behold the Christ you are. So while you're preparing your tithes and offerings, I just remind you to continue to check our website, unityofmadison.org. Take a look at our calendar. We have all types of Zoom events going on. Some are hybrid, some are becoming more hybrid. There's all types of different things, and hopefully you'll find something that suits your fancy. If there's a group you're interested in running, I am open. So please contact me, minister@unityofmadison.org, and let's see what you got, because there's all types of different ways we can keep people involved. So please contact me if you have something. And now I'd like to invite you to please take your tithes and offerings in your hand, and let's place them over our heart as we say together our offertory blessing. Divine love, through me, blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, all that I give, and all that I receive. Thank you, God. And we're not passing the baskets around. You'll find it on the door as you leave. Please, we're asking everyone to exit through this door here. Just be careful because there is a step down, so don't trip as you go out the door. And unless you need to go out the front door, that's fine too. You can do that. But there's some kind of a silk cloth or something in that basket. You can just place your offering up underneath there. So, and now our offertory song, I Am So Blessed.